Necrophobia is the fear of death, all things to do with death, from dead bodies, funerals, caskets and cemeteries. Thanatophobia is the fear of dying, i.e. the fear of your own death. It may be uncomfortable, but these people are not fearful of going to a loved one's funeral or seeing a cemetery. However, both of these phobias have the ability to cause massive disruptions in a person's ability to function, hence the phobia part of the word. So how do you get over it? Please like and subscribe if you find this video helpful. It really helps YouTube algorithm know that it's worth watching and will suggest it to non-subscribers. Now let's talk conquering your death phobia. For the purpose of this video, we'll be using the term death anxiety to describe necrophobia, thanatophobia, and any general but non-clinical fear of death. It just makes things a bit clearer, and the way a professional such as myself would go about treatment for each of these is extremely similar. With that in mind, if you have a clinical phobia, that is to say it is impeding your functioning in one or more large parts of your life, seeking one-on-one professional treatment is strongly advised. While that's not possible for everyone, with a bit of self-awareness and introspection, these tips may help put you in the right direction. Understanding the origins of your fear. When a therapist asks this question, you will generally receive one or two answers. Either, I know exactly where it came from, and then they'll go on to explain it, or a whiny, I don't know. Now, sometimes they legitimately don't know, they were too young when the memory formed. But most do if they sit back and take the time and energy to really think about it. It could be linked to anything really. The death or near death of someone close to you, a traumatic event, a severe illness, old age. A fear of death is also somewhat of an evolutionary necessity in some respects, as we said in our Why Are We Scared of Death video, which, since you're watching this one, I would highly recommend you go watch that one afterwards. It's not 100% necessary to know where the fear originated from, but it does help give some clarity and a point to start working through these issues. Understand if it is a fear of dying or fear of death. This can be a bit confusing as there is a lot of crossover. A fear of death is usually described as being afraid of what happens after death, the consequences of your death, or what death means. For example, many people's fear of death comes from having a difficult time with the uncertainty of what happens to us after we die. In a sense, fear of death is an existential fear. Fear of dying, on the other hand, tends to be more about the process of death, specifically the pain and suffering that might be involved in the activity of dying itself. In this case, being scared of death might be something grown out of a more specific fear, like how painful dying of cancer will be, or being alone while dying. Each of these has different practical actions that you can take to become more at ease with either of these fears. Validate your fear. You are not a bad, pathetic, or sad, or a snowflake person because you fear death, or whatever words you've got going on in your head there. Just get that out of your head right now. You have a valid reason for your fear, whatever that may be. But if it's impeding your functioning, then you have let your fear get the best of you. Your fear is not simply a part of your life, it's leading your life. Think of it this way, because as we said before, a bit of fear about death is an evolutionary instinct. Okay, so some years ago, I was told by my doctor that I was drinking too much water every day. And this was causing a whole range of issues in my body, and you can die from water intoxication. Now, if this was heroin, I would cut it out of my life completely, go cold turkey, because it's not necessary to live. But water? You need water to live, just not as much as I was drinking. So I couldn't go cold turkey, but I had to rein in my intake. Much like death anxiety, you still need some of it to make your life worth living, but too much anxiety will make you sick. We are not trying to completely get rid of the fear, just bring it back into reasonable levels. You see what I'm saying? Stop feeding your fear. You know how internet algorithms will see that you've looked up cute puppies and suddenly you're inundated with videos and articles and ads that lean towards that topic? Or if you lean politically one way, your entire algorithm is set up just to give you more information on that point of view rather than letting you see every point of view? Well, you need to stop doing that to your own brain. If you know that after watching 3 hours of true crime videos, your fear of death gets set off and now you're worrying about how painful death can be, don't watch it. This is a conscious and deliberate decision that you have to make. And that's just one example. But the point being, if you realize that you keep feeling bad after doing something, stop doing it. This kind of thing is a very easy habit to get into and a very difficult habit to break. But do you want your habit, or do you want to not worry about death anymore? The other thing you need to stop doing because it feeds your fear is avoiding it. Avoiding the fear itself and avoiding death. We've said this in other videos, but we don't really see real death anymore. So it's kind of become a big old boogeyman, some kind of monster lurking in the background rather than just a natural part of life. How many people have seen someone die? How many people have seen a dead body? And not on TV or a freak accident, but like an elderly family member passing away. Some cultures are really good at this, and some not so much. Now, I'm not saying run over to your local morgue and ask to see their collection of stiffs. I mean taking regular walks through a cemetery or researching cultures that have a more open and positive view about death, because there are many out there. Educate yourself, take the mystery out of it. Stop the chronic worrying. Worry is a mental habit of thinking unhelpful and anxiety-producing thoughts about the future. Doing this sometimes is normal, but chronic worrying is excessive and compulsive and intensifies your fear of death. Why? Because all these compulsive thoughts send signals to your brain that something is dangerous. Your brain is then on alert and starts to see danger everywhere, and your adrenaline shoots up. Great if there's a bear right in front of you, but not so good if you're just trying to get to sleep. You know when people watch horror movies or something like that, and once they finish, they've got like this hour afterwards where even a slight shadow in the room makes them jump? That's your brain, and you're feeding it those horror movies. There are many types of therapy approaches to overcome this, but cognitive behavior therapy is your best bet. Stop catastrophizing. Tell me, does your brain sound something like this? I really want to go on an overseas trip. A nice beach, a bit of sunbathing, that would be really nice. I should really book that. But then I'd have to get on a plane, and that's an 8-hour flight. What happens if the plane crashes? That's going to be painful, and I don't want to die.
And a lot of planes don't get found, and then my parents won't know that I'm dead, and then they'll really get stressed, and mum has a bad heart, and then she'll have a heart attack, and then my dad will blame me, and maybe I should just stay home.
Time out. If that sounds like you, you're catastrophizing. And for people with anxiety, this sort of thing is extremely common. You need to challenge those thoughts before they run away like a heavy train with no brakes. This is something you have to consciously do. For example, by the time you get to what if the plane crashes, you should be stopping yourself with something like, wait a second, the chances of crashing is like extremely low statistically. Thousands of flights fly every day and they're not just dropping out of the sky. This is just one example, and it takes practice, a lot of practice. But you can see how this kind of catastrophizing would lead you to not do anything. People with death anxiety often have other anxieties such as flying, which, shocker, is another thing that you can't control. But you are in control about how you choose to think about these situations. Step out of death denial. When you don't like something, you tend to avoid it and simply try to ignore its existence. Well, guess what? That doesn't make it go away. We see this a lot when we try to get people to write their wills. It won't happen to me, or I'm too young, or whatever. People know intellectually that they're going to die, but when you challenge them, they say, of course I know that, I'm not stupid. But they don't actually put that knowledge into practice. No talk about how your partner will look after the kids if you die tomorrow. No asking questions about what your parents will want when they're dying. I don't know how many times this needs to be said, but talking about death will not kill you. I can talk about winning the lottery all I like, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen. Talking about death openly won't make it happen either. The point is, you may not like that death is inevitable, but the sooner you can accept, not just know it, accept it, and accept that death is a natural and necessary part of being a living being, the sooner your anxiety will calm down. Talk to others. Many people want to talk about death, but they're concerned that other people will think they're morbid or it'll make other people uncomfortable. Many people have death anxiety even if they don't admit it, so try talking with family and friends. Alternatively, death cafes are a thing. People come together to talk about death in an open and honest way. Find one in your area or find one online. After COVID, many sprung up online to help people cope with death being so in their face. There are also Facebook groups out there for people with death anxiety, although be careful with these. They can be good for knowing that you're not alone, but they can also dwell on the issue rather than finding ways to overcome it. The point is, find the group that's right for you. On another note, With our Taboo Education company, we are looking into providing one-off online consultations for people about their death anxiety who perhaps can't afford ongoing therapy, so we can set them up with the right approaches and resources to help them overcome their anxiety themselves. Now, we're not sure if this is a viable idea yet, so perhaps do us a favour and let us know in the comments if this is something that you'd be interested in doing. Use positive visualization. Yeah, now I know this sounds a bit airy-fairy, but work with me for a moment. Are you one of those people who is convinced you're gonna die in a long, painful way? You keep picturing it in your head, like getting crushed by a tractor, even though you've never been on a farm, or dying of nuclear radiation poisoning, even though you don't live near a nuclear site. If you've got a fetish for that kind of thing, then go right ahead. But for the rest of us, how about trying to visualize something a little more positive? Because most people don't die on one of the extremes. They die in the boring middle. For example, you might imagine yourself passing away peacefully in your own bed with your close friends and loved ones around you. Or you might imagine people at your funeral giving a eulogy and describing their favourite memories of you. Or you could imagine drifting off to sleep for the last time, finally free of the chronic pain that you've struggled with for so long. You have options. Stop giving yourself the negative options. Put plans in place. For a lot of people, their fear of death stems from not being in control. Putting plans in place can give you that level of control. Now, everyone probably should be doing all of these things, but one step at a time. If you have a fear of dying, as in you're worried that it will be painful, what happens if you're in a coma, will I be alone, then you really should be writing your advanced care directive, or living will, depending on where you live. We've done a video all about these and I'll link it below for you to check out. But in a nutshell, this is a document that outlines your preferences for future care based on your values, beliefs and goals in the event that you're unable to make a decision for yourself because you're ill or incapacitated. Or perhaps you have a fear of death stemming from a concern about leaving your children. If this is the case, check out our video on how and why you should prepare your will, so you can make choices now that will positively affect your kids after you die. Or maybe your fear stems from the fear of being forgotten. Then plan your memorial service in advance. Make it a huge party or a sentimental event, depending on what you want. There are a lot of tech tools out there to help with this, or to leave your final goodbye. Or if you're terminally ill, perhaps a living wake is for you. Partying it up with your friends and families and having them say all those nice things about you before you're gone. Explore spirituality and philosophy. Religion is a bit hit or miss when it comes to death fears. It can either calm it right down or send it skyrocketing. You will know in yourself which way it might go. If you find it calming, then look more into it, embrace it. If that's not really your thing, try philosophy instead. Hey, don't run away, pack your butt. Philosophy is not as scary or as boring as we were led to believe in school. Indeed, other than CBT, the most commonly used therapy approach for death anxiety is existential therapy. In a nutshell, existential therapy focuses on free will, self-determination, and the search for meaning, often centering on you rather than your symptoms. The approach emphasizes your capacity to make rational choices and develop your maximum potential. And I promise when you're doing it, it doesn't seem so fluffy. And you can always look into this yourself. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with those two things, but I thought I'd put it here because it might help someone. I'm a very fact-driven person, so these kinds of things never really held my attention for that long. But what drives my ability to cope with mortality has been history and anthropology. Learn how other cultures now and in the past have dealt with and viewed death, because this negative, creepy way that a lot of us see death today is certainly not the only way. And if you want a starting point, for me, it was looking at Victorian England and their mourning processes, and seeing how we slowly went from death acceptance then to death avoidance now because of a few key changes in our society over the past 100 and 150 years. These are just some of the ways to start overcoming your death anxiety. It takes time and it takes effort. Don't underestimate that. For those of you who have come to an acceptance about death, let us know in the comments how you managed that. It might help someone out. You may or may not be able to implement these things yourself, and you may need to seek out a professional to at least start the process. But remember, your fear is valid, but it shouldn't impede your functioning, and it can be overcome. And with that, well, go talk death.